The Swiss Family Robinson, Chapter 16, Cassava Bread. At daybreak the next morning, I got up without rousing any of the others, as I had my doubts about the safety of the raft and the boat. Harnessing the donkey to the sledge, I summoned the dogs and went down to the beach. But the boat and raft were quite safe, though the rising tide had changed their position a little, and without delay I placed upon the sledge a light load and returned to Falcon's Nest. None of the family were awake, but at my call they soon appeared, somewhat ashamed of their indulgence of sleeping so late. And after a hasty breakfast, we repaired again to the shore, for I was anxious to have the boats unloaded before noon, that they might be ready to float as soon as the tide served. By the time we reached Falcon's Nest with our last load, the tide had sufficiently risen, and I at once steered with Fritz and Jack back to Safety Bay, for the beautiful weather, the calm sea, and the fresh breeze tempted me again to the wreck. It was late in the day when we reached the vessel, and I merely collected what could be packed quickly and without much trouble. Jack found a wheelbarrow, and Fritz discovered something far more useful: the ship's pinnace, carefully packed between decks in pieces, all numbered with rigging and fittings complete, and supplied with 2 small cannon. To raise the boat from its present position, fit it together and launch it, would require strength and skill, and I saw that it was impossible to commence such an undertaking now. I therefore directed the boys whilst they loaded the raft, urging them not to lose a moment. Among our useful articles we hastily put on board a copper boiler, a grindstone, 2 large iron plates, a powder cask, a box of flints for the guns, which were most welcome to me, several tobacco graters, and 2 more wheelbarrows beside Jack's. We again set sail, for I was anxious to avoid the land breeze, which generally rose after sunset. So after sunset, the wind would come from the land, so they wouldn't be able to go in. And the Pinnace is a new ship. Like, it's a whole little ship that they had inside the big ship that they could put together once they got there, so they could do smaller things. So they found a little boat that they can build, and they found all this other stuff. I warmly praised the industry of the 2 younger boys. My wife was delighted with the barrels, which was full as possible with articles from the boat, but she looked rather doubtfully at the iron plates and the graters. I warmly praised the industry of the 2 younger boys, who during our absence had collected a splendid store of potatoes and a large number of maniac roots, similar to those which Ernest had discovered on the previous day. As a reward, I gave each of them 2 of the smallest wheelbarrows for their own use. The graters and iron plates were lying on the ground near us, and my wife, pointing to them, inquired, "Of what use are these, my dear?" "They are to assist in providing you with fresh bread." "Well, I cannot imagine," she exclaimed, "what tobacco graters have to do with new bread. Besides, even if you have flour, where's the baking oven?" "Flat cakes can be baked upon any iron plate," I replied, "and as for the flour, that can be obtained from the cassava roots. If you will make a couple of small, strong bags of sailcloth, we will try an experiment in bread making before we sleep tonight." My wife soon got the bags ready, but I could see that she had not much faith in my powers as a baker, for she placed the newly arrived copper boiler on the fire, filled it with potatoes to be ready for supper in case the bread baking should be a failure. In the meantime, I spread a large sailcloth on the ground and set each of the boys to work with a grater and 1 carefully washed maniac roots. In a short time, we had a heap of what appeared to be moist white sawdust. So they made a big mound of it. When a sufficient quantity had been scraped, I filled the bags and sewed them with the ends tightly, so that they would be pressed, only the poisonous sap would flow out between the threads of the cloth. To obtain the means of pressing, I laid 2 of the 3 sailcloth planks of the smooth planks on the table, and placing the bags of flour upon it, covered them with another plank. I next took a long beam and used it as a lever by placing one end under the arched root of the other tree. Then, heaping upon the other end lead, iron bars, and stones, with every heavy article I could find, the sap was very soon seen flowing to the ground below. I think we shall be able to commence baking bread making soon, exclaimed Fritz. After a time, not a drop of juice was falling from the bag now. I am quite ready, I replied, but before we attempt to make bread for ourselves, a cake must be baked for the chickens and the monkey. If they eat it, and without harm, we may safely follow their example. The bag was opened and the meal spread out to dry. I moistened a small quantity with water and adding a little salt kneaded it into a cake, which was laid on one of the iron plates over a clear fire, made between large stones on the earth. As soon as the underside was brown, the cake was turned, and when sufficiently baked, taken out to cool. The cake exhaled such a delicious odor that the boys looked on with envy as I gave it to the animals, and had not firmly opposed their longing, they would, I believe, have helped themselves. I noticed with satisfaction that the fowls were eagerly eating up the crumbs, and that Master Nip was rapidly munching his piece of cake with great gusto. See, my dear, I said, addressing my wife, the animals have eaten it all, and we must begin our baking operations early tomorrow, if we find that the fowls are not the worse for what they have eaten. We seated ourselves to partake of supper. The potatoes were excellent, and once more, with thankful hearts and appeased appetites, we retired to our castle in the trees.